All right, well, I think we'll get started. I want to start off by welcoming everybody. I hope everybody's having a great afternoon. I'm Tom Schreier, and I'm the founding director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at Notre Dame. It's our program for those who have completed their chosen career and look to return to campus for an academic year to discover, discern, and design their next act. Now that there seems to be a light at the end of the pandemic tunnel, I truly welcome those who are interested to look into us at nd.edu/inspired. We're thrilled to be returning this semester with a continuation of the Inspiring Conversation speaker series. We're going to spend this semester discussing transforming lives and lives transformed. And we're focusing on three critical and timely topics: pursuing a second act, the intersection of spirituality and leadership, and solving societal problems. We have been most fortunate to have such great interest in this program with over 1,300 subscribers from 34 countries. We're also grateful to those who are working with us for their involvement in this series, particularly the Alumni Association and Mary Scott for the thought and work they have put into this platform, ThinkND, Notre Dame's online learning community. We hope that you'll find your experience as part of our community to be engaging, inspiring, and consistent with the ethos of our programs and the university. This week, we're delighted to welcome Father Edward Monk Malloy to discuss Chosen to Lead. As many of you know, and as you may have seen in the preview video on ThinkND, Monk was the 16th president of the University of Notre Dame, commencing in 1986 for 18 years. He's a full professor in the Department of Theology and has been a member of the faculty since 1974. As president emeritus, he continues to teach, conducting a seminar for first-year undergrads each semester, and he makes his home in Soren Hall, a student residence hall on campus, which is where I had the privilege of living, starting, hard for me to believe, over 40 years ago. In addition to his extensive leadership in higher education and serving on numerous boards presently and in the past, Monk has also played a leadership role in efforts to promote community service and combat substance abuse, both locally, nationally, and globally. Before serving as president of Notre Dame and continuing to today, through his youth and I believe just 2 days after your 51st anniversary in your vocation as a priest, you did not seek out leadership, Monk, but you were chosen to lead. What is it about Monk that caused others to call upon him to serve as a leader? Today is our chance to explore exactly that with the man himself. It's a privilege, Monk, to welcome you to Inspiring Conversations.
Thanks very much, Tom. I remember well when we lived together in Soren Hall. I'm proud of what you've done in your career and your involvement now with Notre Dame with this wonderful program. So I'm honored to be invited, and I hope I can make a contribution. I look forward to answering or responding to thoughts and comments from any of you. But since I've been teaching a course on biography and autobiography to first-year undergrads for many years now, I tell people that all of us have a story to tell. The question is, how many minutes do people want to listen to it? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, picking up on some things that I think are relevant and that kind of prepared me well for the leadership role that I played later on. I was born in Washington, D.C. My parents were both high school educated. They grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. My father was a claim adjuster for the transit company. My mother was a sometime secretary. I have two slightly younger sisters. I lived in an apartment all the way through my time before coming to Notre Dame. So we didn't have a lot of resources, but we always were well fed and well loved, and that was the most important thing of all. My parents committed themselves to providing a Catholic education for myself and my two sisters. I went to St. Anthony's Grade School, Archbishop John Carroll High School. And Carroll, when I was there, ended up having the best high school basketball team in the country for 2 years in a row, my senior year. And the following year, we won 55 straight games. I had about 60 offers when I graduated. But the most important thing about that experience, we were the first integrated team in the history of the city, the capital city. And as a result of that, I had all kinds of experiences of the reality of race at that moment before blossoming of the civil rights movement. And I became convinced that there's no substitute for spending time in each other's company, people that are different from us, forming friendships, and having a common agenda of work and activity. So anyway, that was a big part of my life. My father was always a lover of the city, and I followed his example and became a kind of selective tour guide. And so I mastered a lot of the details of our capital, Washington, D.C., and I love showing people around. One of the keys, of course, is figuring out where to park at different times of day or night. So I'm an urban person. Didn't grow up on a farm, didn't grow up in the suburbs. And that's been a big part of the kind of interest I've had later on, seeing how cities work, how they can be reformed, how to deal with some of the complex issues that people in every urban environment face. Another dimension of my life was when I came to Notre Dame, I thought I wanted to be an engineer, chemical engineer, because I had a professor in high school that convinced us to beat the Russians after Sputnik. We needed to be in science or engineering, which I don't think was a great motive. And I had a very difficult first semester, and I had to get out of engineering. And I ended up as an English major. I did some battery of tests, and they said English or history, and I could have done either one easily. But English was a great place for me. I love to read, I love to write. I love the expansive way that literature can take you, the inner and the outer realities of the world in which we live. So that became the perfect place for me to be. I enjoyed Notre Dame right from the first moment I arrived. I like the residence tradition. Of course, I'm still living within it after all these years. I thought that higher education was a very interesting place. I thought maybe someday that's where I'd like to work. Then my junior year, I found out that there was a service project for a group called CELA, and I was going to Peru, and that got filled up, and then they decided to have two groups go to Mexico. So I went to Aguas Calientes. And while we were there, we visited a shrine in Mexico, Cristo Rey, which is a gigantic statue of Christ the King. And while I was there, I had this kind of mountaintop experience of a call to become a priest. I didn't hear voices or see a vision, but there was a kind of sense of certitude in my innermost being. So my senior year, I pursued it. Part of Ernie Bartel was our director, and then he went off to study for his doctorate at Princeton. And I corresponded with him, and gradually he led me to apply to Holy Cross. I was accepted, and then I joined the seminary. In my time in the seminary, I worked in Detroit the year after the riots there. That was a very challenging set of circumstances. I worked at St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital in the maximum security ward. After you spend time there, you can deal with students of any kind. And that was a great preparation for dealing with all kinds of things, from dangerous circumstances to mental illness and everything that went along with that. Then eventually, I did 2 degrees, master's in English and theology, went off to Vanderbilt to study for my doctorate in Christian ethics. I was the first priest in my program. Father Raleigh Williams was there with me, and he was the first priest in his program. So all of a sudden, we were in this ecumenical environment, which I thought was a great place to flourish. All kinds of questions were being asked, and it gave me an opportunity to think about things in the broadest fashion of all. So I finished my time there. I came back. They asked me to head the college seminary program for 4 years, became MDiv director for 4 years, became undergraduate theology director for 1 year, and then the board of trustees had Ted Hesberg take some people that were younger and put them in positions of potential successors. And 4+ years later, I was chosen as his successor. And the other 2 candidates, Father Bill Beauchamp became my executive VP, Father Dave Tyson became vice president of student affairs. And we collaborated very well together. They went on to become presidents at the University of Portland later. Dave became our provincial. So I think our experience together, we tried to figure out what could we add to what Father Hesper was doing. We decided the town-gown relationship was a place to start. So that's where we put our energy. We met with the mayors and the city and council and the county council and thought, how did they see Notre Dame? What could we do better to make them feel more welcome here, to provide assistance of various kinds? And so when I became president, that was one of the things we took on. And it's, I think, served a lot of good purposes since, as we've seen the development of the neighborhood around us and the flourishing of a city that was somewhat affected drastically by, like so many of the Rust Belt cities in this country. Later on, I loved continuing to teach. One of the most dramatic things I was ever involved in was 11 years ago when I became a kidney donor. My nephew was on dialysis, and I was ready to give my kidney to him after being tested. And then they called up 2 weeks ahead of time and said, would you be willing to swap? So it took us a millisecond, and we said, sure, if it helps other people. So I gave my kidney to a woman whose son gave his kidney to my nephew, and he was much closer in age. They were incompatible with each other, but I was compatible with my nephew. So we became, we were told, the first incompatible pair swap in human history. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they told us. After serving 18 years as president, I stepped down. I published 5 books since then. The last 2, Monk's Musings and Monk's Notre Dame People, Places, and Events, should be in every Notre Dame graduate's bookshelf. The last one is a kind of love affair expression of my own to Notre Dame and its people. I've enjoyed living in a dorm. It's my 41st year in Sarin. I really enjoy teaching. Next year, we have to move out of Sarin. We're going to move to Zahn while they renovate it, and then we'll move back. So it's been a great experience. I love teaching. I'm working on a book on leadership right now. And so it keeps the mind and juices going. The last thing I'll say, what do I do to relax? I read a lot of books, and I review books and movies. Last semester, I reviewed 75 books and 75 movies. And I don't do it to prove anything except share some of my experience with other people. I love crossword puzzles. I do them all the time. I'm pretty proficient at it, but I do it for fun, would never enter a contest. I love the theater. If I get a chance and I'm in New York or London or someplace, I try to go to as many places as I can. There's just something about that performance, live performance, where the interaction between the players and the audience is so significant. I love walking around cities, exploring new places. I've been to 90 countries. And fortunately, because Ted Hesper traveled a lot, nobody ever questioned. Most of it was university related. But when I was there, I figured I might as well see it while I'm here. So I extended my stay often. And so I become interested in the whole world. And you recognize how complicated the world is, and everything that affects one country eventually affects another. The last thing I'll say is I think Notre Dame has just done a terrific job in response to COVID-19. I give Father Jenkins and his colleagues a great credit. Today at Notre Dame, it's going to be 79 and sunny, which is not typical first part of April weather. But they put the benches and the places of gathering outside again. And our students will take full advantage of that. It's one of the ways of lessening some of the impact of the virus. Hopefully we'll get past this soon. And we're going to start vaccinating our students Thursday. So let that be my intro, and we can kind of go from there.
Monk, you've raised a bunch of really rich topics. Thank you. The first thing that I think about is, I'm sure you've been selected for a number of leadership roles, and you've said yes to many and no to some. Talk a little bit about your decision criterion as a leader, as to which ones you decide to say yes to and which ones you decide to say no to.
Well, when it came in the trajectory of administration toward the presidency, I was asked by my religious community and by the university, and I felt since we've been involved in the life of the institution, that was part of my calling. And Holy Cross is deeply involved. We had a meeting recently of all the priests in residence in the dorms, not the rectors, but in residence. There were over 30 of us. So if you start putting that plus the rectors, we still have a large presence in the dorm life, the residential life, and many of us, of course, that are in residence are part of the faculty or part of the administration. So I've seen what I've done at Notre Dame as a function of my calling to be a Holy Cross priest. I was invited along the way to be the head of many of the higher education associations. I served in those roles because I was honored to be asked, but also because it made Notre Dame more visible. And it allowed me to learn more about what was going on in higher education across the board. Community colleges, junior colleges, flagship institutions, liberal arts colleges, and so on. And so that was a very fruitful opportunity and a whole range of things. One of them focused on service learning, which I'm very deeply committed to, where people get out and do something with a group they otherwise would not know much about. Then they bring it back into the classroom, and then hopefully it becomes part of their lifelong learning. And one of the things that I love about the Notre Dame Alumni Association is that they promote that at the local club level. And a lot of the younger people, when they get involved with the club, that's what they do first. So, all of that's been really important. I was asked by the church to do a number of things. I was invited by Pope John Paul II to be involved in the Ex Corde Ecclesiae discussions in Rome, and then by the bishops of this country to be part of the implementation committee, on which I served for, 10 or 12 years. Seemed like half my life. And so that was important, but I thought that's what I'm called to do, to serve the church. I've said no to a few things. I've never been on the board of a for-profit organization. I've been invited, but I felt that my gifts were better served in the not-for-profit area. I've been invited occasionally to give talks that I didn't think I had anything to say about, or I wasn't sure that the audience was going to be very welcoming. So some of the things I've turned down like that, but all things being equal, my inclination is to say yes, if there seems to be any fruitful outcome of making myself available.
Wonderful. Can you talk a little bit? You play a number of different roles, and maybe just talk a little bit. How do you balance your roles as a priest, a Holy Cross community member, a faculty member, a board member, other roles? How do you strike that balance and kind of maintain, your sanity in the midst of all of that and your composure?
Well, we're in the new Corby Hall at Notre Dame, which is just wonderful. I mean, it's a really attractive building. Gives us a lot more leeway to spread out. We're looking forward to welcoming people and showing it off,
Right.
both inside and outside. But my community has always been a great support to me. And that's one of the things I like about the Notre Dame community, because it's large and very diverse, not only by interest, but also by age. And I think we interact quite well together. We've had very good leadership in our common life. And then I have had many friends from colleagues in the administration, from people I've met along the way, former students, people that we had something in common with. I met a lot of people through playing basketball with them in my later years, and that was always a lot of fun. So I think the important thing is the combination of former students, former colleagues or present colleagues, people in my community, and the present generation of people. I mean, they're a lot younger than me, but I still enjoy their presence, and it gives me a sense when I get up in the morning, I have something to offer because I have a lot to learn from them. So don't feel sorry for me. I feel very fortunate in the kind of life that I've chosen.
Well, you mentioned basketball, and I was a former beneficiary of Monk Hoops. Hopefully, you don't remember how terrible I was. But can you just talk a little bit about the role and importance of athletics in your life?
Well, I played when I was younger. I played baseball. We won the city championship recreation league in the summer in baseball and softball. Of course, I mentioned my high school basketball team. I played a lot of summer league basketball league teams as well. I played a little bit of tennis. I played football in grade school, but not later than that. And little odds and ends like that. But my main sports were baseball, softball, football, and basketball. And I always enjoyed not simply playing in a team context, but informally as well. In my generation, no, I didn't know anybody who played soccer or lacrosse or hockey. There was no place to play hockey that I knew of. I still can't swim because I was always in the playground instead of going to pools. And the old story was you couldn't graduate from Notre Dame if you couldn't swim, but somehow I beat the system. But anyway, I've always enjoyed sports. Today, I'm a big fan. I love football, both college and pro. I love basketball. I'm a big fan of the women's basketball team. Neil Ivey, the women's basketball coach, is a former student of mine. Buffett McGraw and I were huge fans, friends of each other through the years. Her new book on leadership just came out, which I recommend. Mike Gray I hired, so I've always had a great relationship with him. I just watched the men's championship game last night, which was a runaway. I wasn't happy about that. And I watched the women's championship game, which I thought was not very well played. So the previous games were a lot better than the championship game. But I know from my experience in high school, it's really hard to be undefeated. All the things you did automatically earlier in the season gets harder and harder as you get tireder and the pressure is on you and that sort of thing. So when Gonzaga lost, it didn't surprise me. But anyway, I'm a big fan. I enjoy it. And it's nice having leisure activities like that to get away to.
So shifting gears a little bit, one of the things when we talked beforehand that you mentioned was this kind of interesting intersection between being a priest who's taken a vow of poverty and engaging in a very constructive way with people of significant means. I just thought you had some interesting reflections on that. And so maybe you could offer those to the group here. Especially in a fundraising context, you had talked about that.
Yeah. I wonder when I became a vice president, but even more when I became president, would my integrity be questioned? I mean, would I be put on the spot about where I was politically or begging people to give something to the institution I believed in? I really look back and say that it did not turn out to be a problem from my point of view. I think the temptation is not that people put you on the spot. The temptation is that you get too used to what they can provide. So I've eaten in some of the finest restaurants in the world. I've done all this traveling. I've stayed in resorts, wherever groups were meeting and things like that. But I have simple tastes, basically. If I'm by myself and I'm traveling, I'm more like I could eat in a sandwich joint than a fancy restaurant. So a lot depends on how you're brought up and the things that you value. I know nothing about wine. In fact, I don't drink alcohol, but I know nothing about wine. I don't know anything about the fine cuisine, really, except I know it when I like it. But I think the temptation is when if you're a priest and you're into a lot of raising of money, that you think it's about you and not about the cause. If you're constantly reminded that you're raising money for a purpose that's worthy, and there are people out there who have the resources that are looking for worthy things to give some of their resources to, which is what I found, then it's a lot easier. And of course, you're assisted by so many other people. It's not just something you do alone. In my time as president, we raised $1.5 billion. That's a lot of money. And I think it's more than any other Catholic institution ever raised in that time period. In the first campaign under Father Jenkins and Lou Nani, 2.2 billion, and most recently 5 billion. But what happens is I built on what Ted Hesper and his colleagues were able to do. And then John Jenkins is built on that and all the people that help him. But I think it's the pride that people of means have in the institution. It's wanting to be part of something great. And we've been able to attract a wonderful cross-section of people to not only the Board of Trustees, but to our various advisory councils, and to just being benefactors without serving in those other ways.
One other thing you mentioned when we chatted was the fact that you find yourself in a number of occasions being the only priest on a board or serving at a certain place. Maybe if you just talk a little bit about that and how that has been for you.
I'm president of the Boys and Girls Club National Board, which I've been on for many years. I love it. It's a great group. There's a great diversity of backgrounds among those people. Most of them are corporate executives of one kind or another, or lawyers or whatever. And some of them are Jewish, many are Protestant, some have no religion. And I have found that I'm the only priest a lot of them know, at least in a personal way. And it's been very interesting to have conversations with them. Some of my other boards I've been on have a heavy Jewish membership. And they are very interested and one of them told me how proud he was to have given money in the renovation of St. Patrick's Cathedral, because he thought it was such an heirloom and a central resource for New York City and its heritage. That means that we find common ground. I'm a big believer in common ground, that you're working together for youth, or for trying to help people that are addicted, or for higher education or lower education at the primary and secondary level. And when you can find common ground like that, then you discover that you have more in common than you ever imagined. Now, I've also done things ecumenically at our place in Israel, Tantur, and we have various boards and people that we've engaged with that. A lot of conferences at Tantur bring people together from Islam, Christianity, Judaism, various Christian denominations. I've learned a lot from conferences that we've had with them. So because I went to Vanderbilt, I think I have a heads up when it comes to the variety of Christian groups and Orthodox. And I've learned a lot about the divisions among Judaism and about divisions among Islamic people. So I feel that I've learned a lot and that I've been able to find ways of sharing what I've learned with other people in the classroom and outside.
Well, I have a lot of other questions to ask you, but so do other people, Monk. So I'm going to shift over to their questions so we can get them involved and engaged. And I just want to remind people, if you have questions that you'd still like to submit, Emily will send through the form again through Zoom chat. But the first one is not a question. It's actually congratulations from Christopher Cox, who you may know in Milwaukee, congratulating you on your 51st anniversary of ordination, which was on Saturday. So I wanted to make sure to pass that along. The first question is from Pete in Cincinnati. And his question is, with the extreme partisanship in this country's politics and now seemingly in many companies' boardrooms, what do you feel are the key leadership traits required to bridge this ever-broadening divide to forge the path ahead?
Well, it's some combination, I guess, of wisdom and intense effort. In my years as president, I've told people I was interacting on a regular basis with presidents and members of Congress of both parties on a regular basis. And I was always able to find common ground or similarity of purpose. And when you can do that, it makes dealing with neuralgic issues a lot easier. And if you, sometimes what we shared was religion, same faith. Sometimes it was an interest in athletics or an interest in some part of the world or their cultural heritage or whatever it might be. And so, not that it's easy, and there are some people I could never get along with. That's just the way life is. I'm saddened that we have such a partisan divide. And I hope, and that's true to some extent within the church, but I hope that we can find efforts of rediscovering that we have a lot more that we share than divides us. And in an era when, through the internet, false information can travel quickly, it means that we need to work hard on ascertaining what is reliable and what is not, what truth claims are all about. And that we can't just fashion reality out of our head and claim that it's what things are. I think some of the disagreements among us are driven by fear of the future, fear of how the country's changing. And I understand that. The same thing is true in other parts of the world. However, if you've traveled around the world like I have, there's almost no place that doesn't have something like the difficulties that we share. It could be tribal differences. It could be ethnic differences. It could be religious differences. And so it's not peculiar to us. It seems to be a part of what human nature, but that doesn't excuse us from trying to find ways of overcoming it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your comment on that, because it also seems, being a student of English and being a student of history as you are, a lot of these seem new, but actually in many respects aren't, right? I mean, they've happened, if not here, in other places for centuries or for as long as humankind has been around, right?
So I'm 87% Irish and 13% British,
Right.
English. So I'm a melder of two cultures that were hostile to each other for most of their modern history.
Right.
And I know I've spent a lot of time in both of those countries. I had a very small role to play in the Northern Ireland peace process. And I was glad to be able to play that role. Notre Dame played a role in that because we were Catholic, but we were American. We were a university where ideas can be debated, and we had resources. And so we were able to do things in the North that enabled some progress to be made. And we have programs now, foreign studies programs, very vital ones in Dublin and London and in so many other places in the world. And we're hoping that our students can learn. And not all those are operating right now, but let's say they're still what we're trying to achieve. So just about every continent is represented. And just think about how better prepared our students when they get out into their careers are going to be in the future than my generation was, although I was lucky enough to get to Latin America. They can go almost anywhere.
Right. Yeah, and in Latin America clearly was another one of those kind of important moments from your perspective, right? As you mentioned. So our next question comes from Mattoon in Woodbury, Minnesota. And first of all, thanks you for being an inspiring leader for everybody. And then he talks about he asks about your first year seminar where you ask students to write their autobiography, and it's always intrigued him. So do you mind sharing the impetus for you of teaching this course and what you've learned from that course?
Well, when I stepped down as president, I knew that one of the things I wanted to do was write. And I decided that I owed the Notre Dame audience, if nobody else, including my family, a history, autobiography. And so I wrote a three-book autobiography. I enjoyed it very much. One of the things I discovered in the process of doing that is how many people were influential in my life in a very positive way, in critical decision-making points that you kind of skip over after you get to be a certain age. So since I knew I was going to be writing my own, I decided, because I wanted to continue teaching, that I would orient my seminar around biography and autobiography. So what we do is 8 books and 2 movies, and half male and half female. And they pretty much represent all the different cultures. So the book that next Sunday we're doing is Bishop Saad was an Iraqi Catholic bishop who was kidnapped and held for ransom. And eventually he escaped, but he was captured again, but eventually released. And he has studied at Notre Dame as a scholar. And he used to tell little bits and pieces of this. And finally, he wrote a book. And so I've used it a couple of times. The students like it very much. But the material that I look at is set all over the world. And we just did The Miracle Worker, the movie, Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan. And so it was 1952, I think it was 52. Actually, maybe it was 62, but anyway, a long time ago. And I thought, well, it's going to be too dated for them. No, they loved it because it's such a great story. So what I decided that's what we would do. But part of the requirement of the course, in addition to the 10 papers, was your own autobiography. And I thought, well, we'll see how it goes. Well, they're only 19 years old, most of them. What do they have to say? Well, they have a lot. I mean, you could write 20 pages about today if you wanted. And so what amazes me is how personal they are. They tell me stuff about themselves I never would have told my teachers when I was their age. I guess they trust me. I give them back their papers. I say, when you run for president, that's not going to come out from somebody's storehouse or something. But some of them are more dramatic than others. I've had people in my class that have had to deal with blindness, deafness. They were wheelchair bound. I've had students in class that were in prison camps. On the positive side, I had a student who wrote 3 novels before he came to Notre Dame. People who have won national contests, been national champions in sports. People that have gone on to later on to do really interesting things. So I feel lucky to have had the quality of students I've enjoyed, but I have these various techniques I use to try and get them to know each other. We spend the whole first class getting to know each other because we meet for 2.5 hours when we get together. And I think that works. And so I try to get together with my former classes when they're still here, and they form a bond with each other. And that's good to see.
You clearly must be able to establish a trust through that relationship, that they're able to do that, exhibit that kind of vulnerability. And I know from the one class that I have the privilege of co-teaching, when you can draw that out with students, it's really quite remarkable, the kinds of things that they're comfortable sharing and the kind of learnings that happen in that context. So I'm sure it's an amazing class, and it's a privilege for those students that get the opportunity to be a part of it.
It's also a reminder that because our students are pretty healthy looking most of the time, and then you see that somebody may have a life-threatening disease, or they've had a struggle with depression or bulimia or something. And so it just reminds you that appearances aren't everything.
Right.
And sometimes there's a hidden story which they share with me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Bill from Carmel, Indiana says, you've seen many evolutions of Notre Dame during your years associated with her. What do you see as being the most significant next incarnation? And what kind of leadership will be required for that? Is there a different kind of leadership than what was required in the past?
I think Notre Dame is already on the way to being the first great Catholic university in the modern era, a place where the scholarship and the research leads to other people looking in on what we're doing here instead of us using the material that they provided at the major research universities. I think we're well along in some areas, and others we're continuing to push. I think to be a great university, we have to have top quality graduate students. I think the students in general in our undergraduate and professional programs are quite good. But I used to hear when I first became president that our undergraduate students were better in terms of pure talent than our graduate students were. And that's not good if you want to be a great university. What we're also discovering is more and more of our undergraduates are doing research with the faculty, and they're co-publishing before they graduate. And that means they also are working with the graduate students. So the more we can create not a competitive, but cooperative environment in the learning process, the better for everybody. And I think that's a very exciting dimension. Now, the fear that everybody has is you lose your humanity. You get a bunch of kind of ultimate nerds or something. I haven't found that to be the case, but it's a risk. Or that you don't pay any attention to your identity as a Catholic university. Most of the faculty who come to us, their doctorates are from private or state universities, because we get the students from the best graduate programs. And so, in a sense, we've been lucky because some people we've educated here have gone off to teach other and come back. So that's a very good sign. So we're working hard at it, and I think Father Jenkins and his administration have done a great job in paying attention to the academic challenges, and whether it's student or faculty recruitment, and also putting in place the resources necessary. One of the other things that's changing drastically is the nature of the library. I mean, I'm a big book person. I read actual newspapers, actual magazines, and actual books. I don't care how you read them as long as you read. But the library has been transformed. I mean, in terms of computerization and teamwork, used to be keep quiet if you're in a library. Now people talking. I mean, there's areas where you have to keep quiet, but they're sharing. Group projects are a big thing in learning today. So I'm delighted that we're making that transition. We have these research parks, one here and one over where Studebaker used to be. And those are allowing us to be entrepreneurial in that sense, in the STEM areas. And so I think that's a big part of our future as well. But I really do believe that especially at the undergraduate level, but also to some extent at the graduate level, that the core human issues that are taken up in the humanities and the social sciences and theology and philosophy, those are going to remain critical for us. And the best thing that we can say about one of our graduates is that they're highly competent in their area of expertise, but they also have a broad sense of things. I used to have lunch with the former engineering graduates who went on to leadership roles in various areas of engineering. And I said, why do you think you were promoted through the years? And they said, because we had a broad-based education. We could write a paper, we could give a talk, we could evaluate people. And a lot of our colleagues couldn't. All they knew was the stuff that they had learned. So I think that will be a big part of our future if we want to be unique, but also competitive.
Monk, I can tell you personally, when I was asked to take on the role that I have the privilege of having now as leading the Inspired Leadership Initiative, I spent 16 days on campus just making sure that we had the capacity to do it, because I think the university that I went to in the early 80s, it was a very different place than the university of today. And to run a program like we do requires having the kind of institute centers, grad programs, and everything else. And I just want to thank you and Father John and everyone for creating the place that's here today. That offers, I think, people every bit as much as any institution on this globe, and some things distinctive that other institutions can't do and don't have license to do. I think that's part of the beauty of the university, and part of the reason that myself and the other people that I think a lot of people are here is because you've got the kind of resources that other great universities have, but you have license to explore topics that other institutions don't have the same kind of license to explore.
And let's not underestimate the human ambiance, the beauty of the campus. I mean, obviously, people complain if the clouds over and we have cold weather, but that's only a certain part of the year. If you're here all year long, I mean, last summer and fall were just beautiful,
Right.
and the spring is shaping up to be beautiful as well. So when the instant gardens go up and when the trees are blooming and the birds are chirping, and I just love walking around the campus.
Right.
One of the things I tried to include in my new book, Monks Notre Dame, was reflections about the birds and the wildlife and the trees and the flowers and the grass and all of that sort of stuff. Because even though we've expanded the physical part of the campus with buildings, we've also tried to keep the beauty. And I give great credit now to the people responsible for overseeing all of that.
Yeah, no. In having read your book, it shows the importance of place, right, and the importance of preserving the kind of environment that's made Notre Dame what it is, and I think it does feed to the ethos. But I'll go back to another question because there's a number here, and I want to let them have an opportunity to engage here. So our next question here is from Marilyn from New York, and she asks, "Do you have any leaders that inspire you?"
Well, let me start with Father Ted, okay? I'm using the book in my class this semester, God, Country, and Notre Dame. And believe it or not, this generation may not really know much about Ted because they didn't grow up in a Notre Dame family. And so what I have found, whether it's the movie Hesper, which I very much enjoyed, or this book, it gives them access to, they say, well, he's one of us. That's one of the things they like about it. It's all about Notre Dame, and he was one of us, and we didn't know much about him, and look at now, we know a lot more than we did before. So Ted was very good to me. He gave me a lot of leeway when I was a vice president. He stayed out of the way in some senses, but he was always available to me when I became president. And we became really good friends by the time that he left this earth. I would say he would be one example. If I look at historical examples, I'm a big Abe Lincoln fan. I think he was the greatest American president. What I like the most about him is that he learned constantly during the course of his life. That he would issue the Emancipation Proclamation on the basis of his background is just unbelievable. His only experience of Black people was slaves. And he was trying to keep the Union together. That was his highest priority. But I've read an awful lot about Lincoln, and I don't like it when people criticize him today as if he's not the perfect person. He never claimed that. He was the first one to say he wasn't the perfect person. But I think he's a great example of leadership. Nelson Mandela, I think, took on what seemed to be an impossible situation. How would you reconcile the apartheid South Africa and all this desire for freedom and expression and leadership from the Black community there? And during his time of leadership, he just did a terrific job of keeping it all together. Unfortunately, South Africa has had different quality of leadership since then, maybe understandably so. I think there's a whole bunch of other people I've used in my class. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is a very interesting leader. She was somebody that saw a need, responded to it, created a religious community. But I've traveled to places where Mother Teresa's sisters today are doing amazing things in Kenya, in Haiti, in this country, and so many other places. And I'm just amazed when I'm with them. They're so faith-filled, generous, and they just have that touch. You see the hand of God in them. And so she was able to create an ethos among her sisters and a prayer life and a service orientation that I just think is extraordinary.
Next question comes from Kialani in Honolulu, and she wants to know if there's an overarching spiritual principle by which you did your work or do your work.
The center of my spirituality is the Eucharist. I was an altar server when I was growing up for many years. I was, in that sense, always around the altar. When I became a priest, I had the privilege of celebrating the Eucharist. I've done that in so many contexts, I couldn't tell you them all, from the most informal to the most intricate and formal. For me, the Eucharist is the center of Christian life in this world. Holy Thursday, of course, is the model. And the thing about the Eucharist for me is that it's flexible. I mean, you could add more prayers, you can add more songs, you can do everything in long processions or all that sort of thing. But the heart of the Eucharist is what we say in theology is a combination of a meal and a sacrifice. And I think with right understanding, we see it as food for the journey. It's what gets us going, it's what sustains us in times of difficulty, suffering, and pain. Having celebrated a lot of funeral masses, I see what comfort it can bring to people that are mourning, how much it can be a part of a celebration like an anniversary or something for a family. Celebrating baptisms if it's connected to the Eucharist. So I don't want to just exalt the Eucharist because I'm a priest, but long before I became a priest or was in a seminary, it was always the center of my spirituality. You know, when I was a Notre Dame undergraduate student, I would go to Mass just about every day, but I didn't go in the same place because I didn't want anybody to expect me to be there all the time. That was my spirit of independence.
So I think that brings up one kind of topical thing, which is that certainly created a void for many during the pandemic, right? Where the Eucharist couldn't be at least a physical part of their weekly or their daily or their more regular routine as a result of the pandemic. And I know it was a significant void for many as a result of what you've spoken about.
Yes, and what's amazing to me, because the masses at the Basilica are online,
right.
And I do every Monday at 11:30, unless I'm on the road, and sometimes I do the Sunday at 10 o'clock, and I get mail. I mean, it's just amazing. People that I know,
right.
For whom this is. There's somebody. I got an email just the other day from somebody who just died. The first part of the email was how he was a regular in watching all the weekday masses, including mine, and how much he loved the preaching from Sacred Heart. And then the next thing was he just discovered he had colon cancer and died a day later. It was like I was part of his. I mean, I felt like I was part of his preparation.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was extraordinary thing that happened. But I get messages from all kinds of people, and I mean, I'm just one among many that. So we know that there's a real sense of absence out there.
Right.
And in some places, people don't feel that in their local parish or in their area that they have the resources that would meet their need for prayer and for devotion, unfortunately. So maybe they turn to us. I hope that we can continue. I mean, I think the next generation of Holy Cross priests is great. They're wonderful preachers.
Right.
And so I think the tradition's going on, but we need to pay attention also to that's more widespread too.
Right, right. Well, that's certainly been my experience, having been here much more in the last 5 years, is that, yeah, there's also, I think, a great learning given the community nature of the Holy Cross across the different generations of priests. But I've been really impressed with a number of the younger ones, which we've had the pleasure of engaging with, or I have. It's really a powerful group. So I think we have time for one more question, Monk. There are a number of others, so I'm sorry we aren't getting to all of them. But this question comes from Sherry in Florida, and she asks, what can we teach our kids about becoming leaders, or how can we foster leadership in our children?
I'm a big believer that start small and build. So when the Center for Social Concerns began its operation, or even with SEAL, but that became the center, the whole idea was get people involved in service. Who cares? It could be the simplest thing in the world, but try and get them to do it on a regular basis. And then if that gets into their spirit, their innermost being or something, then they're going to do more significant things as time goes on. And that's going to also let them, according to their talents, determine whether they're a behind the scenes person, they can be a leader in that way, or a leader getting everybody organized and trying to inspire them. And I think there's a place for both. I don't think people should be forced to be leaders unless there's an emergency, but I think they should test it out. And so when I was a high school senior, I was a basketball star and all this stuff. And one of the priests there came to me, a junior, and he said, I think you should run for student body president. I went, you do? And I won. I ran and I won. And I love being student body president. But if that priest had not said to me, I don't know if I would have taken that. And that was a preparation. Later on, I was involved in a lot of activities. I became hall president in Baden Hall my senior year. And then each stage along the way, people say, well, he's pretty good. He does things pretty well. So let's give him a chance. And one thing led to another. So I proved that you can fool some of the people all the time, or all the people some of the time, or whatever.
Well, I think that's a perfect finish, Monk, given our topic, chosen to lead, because it does prove, it proves the point that you have been chosen to lead, you've built upon that, and you continue to lead. And it's really just been a pleasure personally, and I hope for everybody here today to engage with you, and I really look forward to your book on leadership, because I think there'll be a lot of really powerful lessons, some of which I'm guessing we had a little bit of a preview of today. So I really do appreciate that. And I also want to thank everybody who joined us today for this episode of Inspiring Conversations. I just want to remind everybody also that next session will be on Tuesday, April 13th. So that's a week from today. And we're going to welcome Sister Gabriella Botani and another sister, Anne Oostenrijk. Both of them both of them are sisters that work with the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking and the International Network of Consecrated Life Against Trafficking. And it's going to be moderated by my partner at the Inspired Leadership Initiative here, Chris Stevens. So I think will be another really wonderful opportunity to engage. We'll, of course, share a primer on it next week on ThinkND. And we'd love for you to take a look at that and come prepared to discuss. And feel free also to share this series with your friends. It's been really wonderful having the opportunity to do this with all of you. And Monk, I just want to thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you. I look forward to seeing you on campus, especially since our offices happen to be across the hall from each other.
No, that's right. We're just down the hall from each other.
Right.
Thanks very much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.